Good morning, students. Welcome to this segment of online lectures. My name is Daphne Uduneje. I'll be anchoring the studio management and presentation course for the next 40 minutes. I want to get started by giving you an overview of the topics that we'll be able to cover within the 5 presentations that I'll be taking. Yes, studio management and presentation has to do with communication. It's a course in a broadcast media that talks about one of the vital aspect of the mass media, which has to do with the studio, where most work in a broadcast is done. And of course, we're also going to look at presentation itself, which again is also a vital aspect of communication in the broadcast industry. I have a lineup of some of the topics I'll be covering. First of all, we're looking at communication. Like I said, studio management is an aspect of broadcast or electronic media. So we'll look at communication, we'll look at the importance of communication, we'll look at the types of communication, and of course, we're going to look at the barriers to communication. Then after that, we're going to look at studio itself. What is a studio? And of course, then we're going to see the different kinds of studio that there are. Aside from the broadcast studio, that's the radio studio and the television studio, there are other studios, and we'll be looking at all of that. Also, we'll be looking at presentation itself. What is presentation? Although before that, we ought to look at management. What is management? But I know you've done a lot on management in your PMP. So as a result of that, I would rather move ahead with other topics. But if we still have time, then we can return to talk about management, because it's still an aspect of studio. And of course, management is key in every organization. So also in studio, we also need the skills, that are in management to be able to manage a studio effectively. And of course, we'll go to presentation. We'll look at types of presentation, the qualities of a presenter, the things you have to do. And after that, we'll be going into radio broadcasts. We do a little on the history of radio broadcasting. Then we'll look at television broadcasting. We'll do a global view of it. And then, of course, we zero in into our country's television and radio operations. But this morning, I want to begin with communication. Now, what is communication? Communication is the sharing of meaning. It's a concept that has so many definitions. A lot of scholars have done a lot, and of course, so much, more than 20 definitions that we have. But for the purpose of this course, I want to just pick 1 or 2 to get us going. Now, communication helps us to, communication serves as an instrument of social interaction. It helps us to understand ourselves, to keep in touch with people, to understand situation. It is a means by which power is acquired, exercised, and sustained. From all that we said, communication is a way of passing or sharing information, sharing ideas, sharing feelings. And this is very, very vital in the broadcast industry. Communication for a good studio manager, to operate effectively, he must have a good communication skill. Because like the definition I've given, communication helps you to pass across your feelings, idea, information. And so that means that to be able to do that, you should have the skills and you should do it effectively. Now there are different kinds of communication. We have intrapersonal communication, we have interpersonal communication, we have group communication, and of course the mass communication, which has to do with the mass media. The intrapersonal has to do with personal is also known as soliloquy. The type that you think of some things to yourself, and it's like you communicate within yourself. That has to do with one person communication. Then there's the interpersonal, which has to do with two persons, or it is also known as face-to-face communication, where two persons interact. And for this kind, there's usually immediate feedback. Then we have the group communication. The group communication has to do with three or more persons. And for group communication, again, feedback is also immediate. And of course, if there are two types of group communication, one, it could be designed and it could be impromptu. That's when it is designed, it has to do with it's organized, it will have venue and invite, could be extended to participants. What that means is, for instance, three or more persons may decide, to form an association. Like some of you students have your mass communication students association. Then you have 2 to 3 persons coming together. And of course, because before you do it, you would have designed the concept, how you want this to be. So invariably, you're going to send out invites. There's going to be a venue. There's going to be a timing. And that is why we said group communication could be designed. But for the other one that comes impromptu, it has to do with circumstances. Circumstances could suggest, could make people want to come together to form an association. Sometimes cases of insecurity, the need to create something, maybe needs in the society that came up suddenly. For instance, that of insecurity could be, God forbid, maybe robbers invaded a place and residents and the residents of that area, maybe tenants and then landlords, could decide to form an association, possibly because of the previous happenings, the armed robbery attack that took place in that area. So such group communication usually is impromptu, it's unexpected, so, and as such, it's not designed. You wouldn't know when it comes up. No invite is extended to any participant. The participants just come up as a result of the circumstances that brought about the discussion. Then, of course, we have finally the mass communication, which the broadcast media is all about. The mass communication here, it has to do with a large number of people. It's usually feedback. In this case, it's usually very, very difficult because the audience of the mass communication are anonymous. That is, you can't reach to them. They are heterogeneous, they are diverse in class, nature, have different kinds of people coming together. And of course, it is usually done through a medium. So as a result of that, we say that many persons are involved. It involves the mass. That's what is called the mass communication. Then let's move a little further to talk about the importance of communication. The importance of communication. Like I said earlier, communication is very vital in studio management because it is the basis of coordination. For a studio manager to coordinate activities in the studio, he should have a good communication skill. He must know how to pass his messages across. It should know how to communicate to the employees the organizational goals, modes of the achievement, and of course, the interpersonal relationship amongst them. This eventually provides a coordination between various employees and also departments. Now, communication also creates a fluency in workplace. It creates fluency, and what that means is that the ability of the studio manager or the studio head or the director to communicate what he wants the members of the studio or the staff of the studio to do helps them to work effectively and therefore makes work very, very efficient. Then number three, it is the basis of decision making. Most times when management wants to, inform or take decisions, which could be either for, most management decisions is most times geared towards moving the organization forward. Now, there's no way they could effectively relate this to the staff except through communicating with them. And this could be done through a skilled communicator. Sometimes when management wants to right size or they want to downsize or right size or whichever word, you discover that it takes effective communication to make them understand the reason the management has to take such difficult situation, and it explains to them the reason why it's the way it is. So, and also it also helps both the management and the staff to decide on the way forward. And of course, communication increases managerial efficiency. Now, the manager conveys the targets and issues instructions and allocates jobs to the subordinates through effective communication. Now, all of these aspects involve, communicating to the members of staff. And number five, communication increases cooperation and organizational peace. Yes, most times when there is a breakdown in communication, it sometimes causes friction in the system. When the members of staff do not understand what the management is up to, they are left with assumptions. They assume most times the wrong things and they make the wrong conclusions. But of course, when the management or the head of a department or the head of a studio takes time to communicate to the staff what should be done and what are the new things that are on board, it helps the staff and the management to understand each other, and in that way there'll be peace and there'll be work will move smoothly. And this of course leads to less friction and leads to industrial peace both in factory and in corporate places. And of course it boosts the morale of employees. When a management is able, or when a student manager is able to communicate correctly and effectively to the staff, this will make them feel like a part of, the corporation or the organization. Like we said, you use communication to interact in the society. And so also in a workplace, you also use communication to interact. You use communication to feel the pulse of, either your colleagues or that of your management. Sometimes when the staff of a place feels aggrieved, if there is an effective communications channel set down, invariably the staff will make use of that channel to do what? To express their grievances to the management. And of course, the management will also use that same channel to do what? To attend to these grievances, to explain where there's a disconnect. But in a place where there is no channel, there's no way to communicate, sometimes it leads to unnecessary friction. And that's why sometimes you see workers turn against the management or you see, workers take to what sometimes we say when workers want to strike without explaining the reason, because they feel nobody is talking to them, they feel nobody considers them important. And this goes to other aspects of life, in the home, in school, as a student, between students and course mates, between students and lecturers. So in every sphere of life, you discover that communication is inevitable. For things to work smoothly, you must have effective communication in place. Then going further in workplaces, we also have this other kind of communication, types of communication. We have formal communication, we have informal communication. Now, formal communication are the ones which flows through the official channels, like I said. In every workplace, in every standard corporate organization, there is a channel of reaching the top, reaching to those, the junior. There's a channel between the management staff and, of course, the junior staff. So in such organization, formal communication is designed, it takes place between superior and subordinates. Now, a subordinate and a superior or among the same cadre, that is, it could be between the superior and subordinates, it could be between members of staff that are in the same position. It could be in writing, and most times it's usually in writing in corporate organizations. Formal communications are written and filed. And then formal communication can be further classified as vertical and horizontal. For vertical communication, this has to do, just like the name suggests, vertical, it goes up and down. It goes from top to bottom and from bottom to up. Now, vertical communication, as the name suggests, flows most times from top to those below. Upward communication refers to the flow of communication from a subordinate to a superior. For instance, maybe from a cashier in the bank to the managing director or to the manager of that branch, or it could be from the gateman, the subordinate, to the MD. It could be from the head of the department to the managing director. And of course, when it is downwards, it flows from the top, that is from the boss at the top to the staff. Now, horizontal communication has to do with, is also known as lateral communication. This takes place between one division and another. For example, a production manager and a marketing manager. Now, this has to do with different departments. They could decide to discuss on delivery of goods. Maybe the departmental head of a production company possibly had, let's say, marketing manager has an issue while going for delivery, and maybe with the product, and he needs to communicate this, to the production manager who is in charge of manufacturing. So that kind of communication is known as horizontal. And within the horizontal, within this kind of communication, that is the formal communication, we also have what is known as chains of communication. So I'll just run through it, and I'll make the materials available. I should have brought the soft copies or to share materials with you or sharing the screen with you, but unfortunately I could not. I have a challenge with my PC. I lost most of the documents there, so I have to prepare new ones. So I'm very sorry. I apologize for that. But in this next class or in subsequent classes, I should be able to do that. So let me run down the types of communication network that we have. We have the single chain, we have the wheel, we have the circular, we have the free flow, and we have the invited. Now, the single chain is a type of network communication which flows from the superior to the subordinate through a single chain, just as the name suggests. Then, of course, the wheel network, here all subordinates under one superior communicate through him only. The free flow in this network, each person communicates with any other person freely. And of course, the invited V, in this type of inverted V, that is V turned the other way. Now, in this type of network, a subordinate is allowed to communicate with his immediate superior, as well as his superior's superior. So what this means is that now the head of a department is allowed to communicate maybe to the chairman of a corporation, and he could also decide to communicate to the managing director of that corporation. So what that means again is that the head of department of an organization could also decide to bypass his immediate boss and speak to the superior. Now, this depends on organizations. Each organization, every organization has a structure. Every organization has an organigram of how this works. Now, let me move to informal communication. Just like the name suggests, informal communication has to do with a kind of communication which is informal. Now, this type of communication does not have a structure. It has no channel. Informal communication is also known as the grapevine communication. Sometimes you would have heard, people say, I heard it from the grapevine, from the grapevine. So when it is from the grapevine, invariably you can't trace it to a person. It has no source. Like we say in news gathering, we say your source makes your story. I mean, in journalism, yes, you say your source makes a story authentic. And that is why informal communication is not taken serious, because it has no source. You cannot trace it to any person. Now, it takes place, it just comes from anywhere. It could be from the superior to the, it could just come from any department. It flies anyhow, and of course, it goes. But please note that this kind of communication moves faster, okay? Possibly because it doesn't have a channel, nobody could be held responsible. So most times, it flies faster, and it spreads rapidly. And of course, this kind of information or communication most times is distorted. It's from one person to the other, from one department to the other, and as it moves, the content changes. And I think this is mostly or largely because it is not written and because it has no source. So as a result of that, you cannot say, oh, this is the file, or this is the document, or this is the memo where this was said. So that gives credence to this, rapid flow and this informality. But sometimes it is said that these channels may be helpful. That's the channel of informal communication, as they carry information rapidly and therefore may be useful to management at times. Informal channels are also used by managers to transmit information in order to know the reaction of subordinates. So sometimes it is used, once a thing is official, you can hold the management responsible for it. But once it is an official, you don't have a document that you can trace. So sometimes some organizations uses informal channels to kind of get information on or feel the pulse of the staff. So they could just throw a word in the air and it will begin to move, and that way they will get to know what the staff, the opinion of the staff concerning the management. Now also we have different kinds of network in this. We have single strand, gossip network, probability network, cluster network. All of this I will get the material so that you could get to know more about it. Now let's look at the barriers to communication. We have such barriers as semantic barriers, because this has to do with meaning. They are concerned with the problems and obstructions in the process of encoding and decoding of a message in words or impressions. Normally, such barriers result due to use of wrong words, faulty transactions, different interpretations. For example, a manager has to communicate with workers who have to acknowledge. For instance, if a manager has to communicate with workers, and he will need to, you know, if he can't, maybe workers who are, for instance, Yorubas, and he cannot speak the Yoruba language, there will be a barrier of understanding or a barrier of meaning. They will have psychological barriers when people have psychological problems, and the person who has just lost a relative. It will be difficult for such a person to understand what you're saying. The psychological effect of his loss will impede his ability to understand what you are saying. And of course, we have organizational barriers which have to do with structures. Like the types of communication we look at. If you have a structure where a subordinate cannot go to the superior to report, you know, certain things, it will be difficult sometimes for the management to get to know some happenings in the organization, and of course this will affect workflow. And of course, personal barriers, when you also have maybe between subordinates and superiors. When you have a superior who is how should I put it, who feels threatened, you know, by the subordinate, maybe he feels the subordinate is very much hardworking and could possibly outshine him. So there's every tendency that he would not allow the subordinate to have access to the management. So in workplace or even in a studio, don't forget that we're looking at this from the back, from the hinge point of a studio, management of a studio. So even in a studio, this could also take place. So the measures to improve effective communication, you have to communicate ideas clearly. You have to communicate according to the needs of receiver, consulting others before communication, awareness about the language, convey information, and a whole lot of them, which I will be sharing with you in subsequent classes. And please note, I would also want to, if you have, of course, you should have your class reps. So I'm going to give you my email now, and you could send your questions to my email, and also you could, I can also send you the soft copy of today's class ahead of next class. So what I want you to do for me is from the different centers that we have, you could send me the class rep of each center to send me his email address so I can send a soft copy of today's lecture to you ahead before the next class, so you could have a good grasp of what we've said so far. And also, I would also want to give assignments. Most times, studio management, I prefer field assignment, but because of the lockdown that's in most parts of Nigeria now, and because of the COVID-19, it may be difficult to do some of these assignments. So majorly, what you'll be doing is written, you know, assignment. But if in your states, you know, the restriction is not tight, then you could also do some of the assignments that needs you to go to the field, because in the subsequent classes, we'll be looking at presentation. We'll be talking about how to present your work and all of that. So one of the ways you get to exercise that, or you get to learn that, is by doing a presentation itself. And one of what I encourage students to do is to write their scripts, to go out on the field, gather the information, write the scripts, and of course to submit for correction. And you can go ahead and present in your class. So for the purpose of this concept, to get the most of it, I'll give you the assignments, you do it and possibly present in your various centers. Okay, please let me pause at this point and quickly give you today's assignment, and hopefully by the next class, we'll now move into the class proper. My email address, please. Daphne Uduneje, spelled just like my name. Daphne Uduneje at gmail.com. Daphne Uduneje at gmail.com. Now, I would expect the assignments to be in my box between now and the next 4 days, so that I should look at it. If you have questions, you will also send to my box. That will also look at it, and we can prepare ahead. Possibly there are some that we need to discuss maybe before we move into the next class. So the assignments, please, I want you to take that number one. Number one, what is communication? What is communication? Number two, what are the different types of communication? What are the different types of communication we have? Number three, what are the barriers to communication? What are the barriers to communication? What are the barriers to communication? And number four, I want you to look at types of studio. Types of studio. Types of studio. Okay. Have a few minutes left. I'll move ahead. Now the studio. What is a studio? A studio is of course, a studio have different kinds of studio. But of course, we'll be looking at the broadcast and the broadcast studio, which is basically the radio and television studio. But before, I'm going to give you a broad view of the other kind of studios that we have. And of course, every studio is defined based on the function. We have the art studio, we have the educational studio, we have the poultry studio, we have the production studio, we have the instructional studio, we have yoga and martial arts studio, and so many others. So each of them will be defined based on their functions. And of course, we also have the radio studio, we have the comic studio, we have acting studio, so many of them. But so this studio is a place, like a confinement, which is used for achieving a special purpose. So each studio's function or its operation depends on the purpose of setting it up. But some studios, like a fine art studio, is a place that is created to allow students to allow their imaginations or their creativity to, be expressed. They are separated from distractions. They are kept in a place where they could easily think, where their imaginations can easily come up. Then, of course, we have the educational studio, just as the name suggests again. Here, students learn to develop skills related to design, ranging from architecture to product design. In universities where we have architectural departments, most times we hear students talking about going to a studio. So there they also have a studio which has been designed. Most students are focused and designed to achieve a purpose for a special effect. Then we have the poultry studio. The poultry studio is made by an individual porter, and he works there, and a whole lot of them. So I want you to please, as the last assignment, look at these other studios, discover how many that we have, and so that before the next class, in the next class, I'll be talking to you about the broadcast studio, which is the radio studio, and the television studio. But meanwhile, I want you to use the 1 week before the next class to, on your own, research on the various studios and look at the differences between the studio and the radio, the broadcast. The broadcast studio. You discover that there's a lot of difference in terms of the materials found in the studios. Of course, there will be a lot of difference in terms of the functions of each studio. And so once again, I want to text my email for those of you who didn't get that clearly. It's daphne@gmail.com. daphne@gmail.com. Don't forget to put down your questions. That will help you to learn more. If there are things you didn't hear, like in the last class, the class I held yesterday, I learned some students couldn't hear clearly. So you do well to send your questions, any aspect of any segment or any aspect that you didn't hear clearly or you didn't understand. You do well to please send a question to my email, and of course on the subject. And then also I want to remind the class reps to please send me your email so that I'll be able to send this material across your students. Since you have more time. Okay, it's like we have more time. So let me go ahead and then talk about the broadcast studio.